This is the Kestrel Country Podcast, where we discuss the people, places, and events all around Kestrel Country. Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Kestrel Country Podcast. We are coming to you social distanced from our living room.
No, it's the dining room.
Well, dining room.
We're not kidding. We should have moved to the living room to make it a little bit more exciting.
It's an open concept, so kind of all one and the same. But things are getting crazy out there, and we are, quite honestly, practicing social distancing, self-quarantining at home, and not quarantining, I guess, but
I did
anyway,
go to Walmart.
Things are getting nuts out there. So everyone stay safe. Everyone stay healthy. If you're sick, stay home. Practice all those precautions because since the last time we recorded, even things have progressed quite a bit. So,
yep.
Our
last
last,
week ago.
Yeah, since we had on Mayor Lambert a week ago,
Tuesday, a week ago,
things have changed a lot, and they had a meeting, an emergency meeting, and now restaurants and bars and all those kind of things are shut down in Moscow, gatherings of more than 10 people.
Also,
so we're having all those measures come in.
Which really makes a small town like Moscow feel different too.
Yeah, it's quiet. It's really quiet out there. Now, thankfully, we have not yet had a confirmed case here in Moscow in Latah County, but over in Whitman County, they have 2 now, I guess, probably more, but 2 confirmed. So yeah, it's crazy times we're living in. But we were really grateful to be able to talk to Tony Bean, who is the executive director of the Moscow-Pullman Airport. So fascinating. We talked a little bit with him about coronavirus, just a tad.
I mean, obviously, with airports, it affects it. But, as he was saying, it's something that looking past it, the impact that the airport has on our local community is huge, is really huge. So it was a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot that I didn't realize or know before on how the whole system worked.
Yeah, really interesting to hear Tony's background, what brought him to Moscow-Pullman, hear about kind of the big changes that have been happening at the airport, really exciting, and a lot of stuff to come too. So it is a huge part of our community. Given where we're located, air travel is really important for commerce, for visitors, for students and all of that. And our small little airport really has a huge impact. And sounds like it's going to continue to have a greater and greater impact given all the great stuff that they've got going.
Well, and thinking past coronavirus, I feel like the airport, they got the runway in, they're able to do the bigger planes, they're working on more flights. And so that actually could be a huge help in boosting our economy back up.
Yeah, it's true. Helping things speed up quicker with all of that in place. But yeah, really fun to talk to Tony, to get to meet him and talk about what they're doing. And we got him into the studio before all this stuff kind of blew up. So we didn't have to do it over the phone, but we'll probably have some phone interviews over the next coming weeks here on the Kestrel Country Podcast. So thanks again for joining us, and enjoy our interview with Tony Bean. Well, Tony Bean, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate you coming in, and we're excited to hear about the airport and your role there, and excited to talk to you.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity.
So I guess first to get started, when we haven't met before today, I'm just curious to get to know you a little bit, is what's your background? What brought you here, and how did you get involved in the airport?
So I'm born and raised in Montana.
Okay.
My dad was a highway patrolman when I was a kid, so we lived in Missoula, Jordan, Glendive, White Sulphur Springs. I graduated high school in Townsend, which is 32 miles south of Helena.
Okay.
Funny story. I told my dad I was never going to go to college. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 18. I didn't know anything about aviation or any of that. Airplanes were a complete novelty. My first flight ever was to go to boot camp in San Diego, California. And I thought I'd be working on 10-ton truck or 5-ton trucks and things like that. I signed up for a mechanical option. Well, the Marine Corps put me in aviation ground support equipment.
Wow.
Which I didn't know what that was. So I went to school in Millington Naval Air Station, which is outside of Memphis, Tennessee. And support equipment is everything they use on the aircraft that's not part of the airplane. So it's pettibone cranes and aircraft jacks and hydraulic power supplies and electrical power supplies and tow tractors and all this stuff. I did that for 4 years. I was overseas. I was deployed. When it come time to re-enlist, I didn't know what I wanted to be. So the military is kind of the deferred payment plan. If you don't know what you're going to do out of high school, you have 4 choices out of high school. You can go to college, go to work, go to the service, or be a bum. So those are kind of the 4 choices. The nice thing about the military is you get out of the military after 4 years, you can go to college, you've got money. You can go to work, hopefully you have a skill of some sort. You can stay in the military if you didn't screw anything up really bad, or you can still be a bum. And so that was kind of the choice at the time. I wasn't ready to get out. So I picked a different job because mine was full, and I can come up with cryogenics, which is aviators breathing oxygen, liquid nitrogen for struts, tires, things like that. And so it's a support equipment, but it's a different kind. And at the time, so we'd moved from California. My duty station was in California. We went to North Carolina, and I was in Jacksonville, North Carolina for about 2 years, and then I started teaching in Cherry Point. I was driving back and forth each way, 50 miles a day, or 50 miles each way every day. And Southern Illinois University had a degree program for aviation management, and you gave up your weekends for 16 months. And so I working on this degree in aviation management, and I wasn't a pilot, and I wasn't an A&P, so airports kind of became the thing. And so I interned in Jacksonville at Richlands at the airport there. And then I decided I'm going to get out of the Marine Corps. We're going to go back to Montana, not realizing there are only about 450 commercial service airports in the United States. I was just going to get a job in airports. That's what I thought. So we get back to Montana, and I'm looking for a job. About 9 months in, and finally TSA's hiring 20 hours a week. So I start screening passengers for TSA in Helena, Montana. And I'm interning at the airport for everything but wasn't security. And I did that for 2.5, 3 years, and then West Yellowstone came open. And there was an opportunity to run the airport in West Yellowstone at the west gate of the Yellowstone National Park.
Oh, okay.
And at the time, FAA was changing things with airports significantly. So went to work at West Yellowstone, didn't know what I couldn't do. Worked there for 5 years. That's a state-owned airport. So you're dealing with the state of Montana, Island Park, Idaho, West Yellowstone, Montana, the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Park Service, because they all have an interest in that particular airport. So it kind of helped the transition working for Pullman-Moscow, where it's both cities, both universities, both counties, a port district, and you kind of get that same opportunity to have to interact with a lot of different stakeholders. So that kind of helped. But yeah, West Yellowstone was great. We were there for 5 years. 50 below zero is real. Tunneling out of your house is real. And then came over to Pullman and Moscow. So that's kind of the long and short of how I got here.
Wow.
And when was it that you came to Pullman then? What year?
2011.
Okay.
So we've been here 9 years.
Almost 10 years. Wow. What was is West Yellowstone about the same size airport? Quite a bit smaller?
No, completely different. West Yellowstone's airport was built to serve the park interest, but also to serve tankers for U.S. Forest Service. So you'd land P2s, P3s. We landed Air Force One there.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that airport, 6,666 feet in elevation, and the runway is 8,400 by 150.
Wow.
So the new runway that we just built here, the altitude has a bunch to do with it. So here's the funny thing is, West Yellowstone's the highest altitude airport in Montana, commercial service. Pullman is the highest altitude commercial service airport in Washington at 2552. So
Really?
Significant difference. But yeah.
But it's still the highest.
But the runway we built here for Pullman-Moscow is 7,100 by 150.
Okay.
So the higher you go, the longer runway you need. And West Yellowstone for Montana is actually a short runway. Most of the airports in Montana are 10,000 feet.
Wow.
So it's just a different, there's a saying in airports, if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. Because everybody's different on just how they do everything.
Yeah. Huh. Well, tell us about the changes that you've seen in Moscow-Pullman Airport since, so 9 years. That's a lot has changed, right? More recently, a lot's changed.
You're seeing it now.
Right.
It's just been a constant push of change. When I first got here, we were trying to figure out, we were finishing a master plan. The FAA had told the cities, basically in a nutshell, fix your problem with your airport, because we started landing larger aircraft. And what happened after 9/11, you started seeing a lot of mergers in the airline industry. And to the point where airlines as a stock used to be the biggest consumer of capital that never returned ever. You'd put money in an airline and just disappear. And shareholders got tired of that. And so they finally started not putting capital in. So the airlines had to figure out how to become profitable, how to return money to a shareholder that weren't going to get any money.
Yeah.
You were going to be able to capitalize your product. So they started into market discipline and route discipline and all these other things. And then they figured out, well, if we're going to make money on aircraft routes, there's really one way to do that, and that's larger aircraft and less frequency. Flying a lot of small airplanes costs money.
Right.
So what they did was they took the frequencies down and they made the airplanes bigger. Well, we run into a system of airports that are kind of in that 19-seat, and that's where they were built, like Pullman-Moscow was. Then you get into the situation where your infrastructure doesn't fit the aircraft. So now Alaska Airlines brings in a Q400. They're phasing out all the 37-seat and smaller, and we're 76. That's the seating world we're in. And the FAA comes to the two cities and says, fix your problem, we'll help you fund it, or lose your air service. Wow. So that's what they were told.
Okay.
And the two cities own the airport. And they have since 1930s. It's a shotgun wedding, but it works. And because one city at the time, when they were trying to build all of this, could not do it. It needed both. And so both, from that point on, it's been the Pullman-Moscow or the Moscow-Pullman, depending on what side of the border you're on. But they are joint 50-50 owners of the airport. It's not a 51-49 share. They both sign grant agreements, and the cities own the airport, and then they appoint the board to do operations and maintenance and that kind of thing. And myself and the other employees at the airport, we work for the board.
So it's really quick. Sorry, is that normal then, that cities own all the airports?
Not in Washington State.
Okay.
In Washington State, what's normal is a port district. But with the FAA, a sponsor has to own.
Okay.
And so what the FAA is looking at is somebody signing these grant assurances, and you're saying that I'm going to take this money and I'm going to do these things.
Okay.
And it's one of the things that keeps our system safe is it's standard. The reason it's standard is the FAA operates by the golden rule. They have the gold, so they make the rules.
Yeah.
And they do make the rules, and there's very specific things that the cities sign that the airport board and myself are responsible for to make sure that those things happen. You sign these grants with these conditions, and we make sure that those conditions are followed, because you need the ability for, especially with our region, no interstate, no waterway, no railway, everything that's produced in the Palouse is global. And it doesn't matter if it's garbanzo beans or wheat or technological innovations or it's research or it's education, all of it, everything that's produced in the Palouse is global. And so that airport and air service becomes a very critical link for our region to be able to get products and services and the things out. And then it's a huge piece of the quality of life that exists in Moscow and Pullman. And that's one of the awesome things about Moscow and Pullman is you can be as involved in university things, for example, as you want to be or not. You know, it's up to you. You get all the amenities that come with that kind of an entity, but it doesn't have the drawbacks. You know, we live in Pullman, and one of the bigger pushes of living in Pullman was the education. Just for my wife and I coming from Montana, my daughter was 6 when we moved here, and we get to an elementary school in Pullman, and we're talking to the principal, and the principal's got a doctorate, and the kindergarten is a K-5 school. And the kindergarten teacher's got a master's degree. And in Montana, that's a total anathema. You get the basics. That's all you get.
Yeah.
And my daughter's taken biomedicine in 8th grade. And just those kind of opportunities that you see from an education standpoint because of the universities, whether it's Pullman or Moscow, those universities really drive that kind of a piece with the decisions on being able to bring kids to Pullman-Moscow, unbelievable places to raise families.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's why we're here, and that's why so many people are here and love it.
And I grew up here, so I loved it. Growing up as a kid, you know, it was the place you can just bike all over, and it's safe and small.
Yeah. So what did it take to accomplish it? So you said, you know, FAA kind of came in and said, look, if you don't change, you're going to lose your air service. Mm-hmm. So the major change was that the new runway. That was the major change that needed to happen.
That had to happen.
So what? I'm sure it was. You could probably talk for hours about what it took. But can you give us the short example? You know, what happened over the last 10 years to make that happen and get to where it is now?
So any big project, and this is true of life in general, and it's really a good. You know, they talk to kids about getting better at music or sports or learning math or, you know, anything that they talk to little kids about. You don't do big things without doing a lot of little things right. Because you don't look at the elephant. Because if you did, you'd quit. Mm-hmm. You know, when you started out, if you looked at the magnitude of that project and how much we actually did with the project to get a runway in place, you'd quit. Mm-hmm. We changed the law in Congress, literally.
Wow.
But it takes major support, and you've got to have people that believe in what you're doing. And my job essentially is execution. I have two mayors that are just unbelievable. They are the biggest cheerleaders for their communities, and they lead a board of directors that are equally unbelievable. They represent their entities. So on the board is both mayors. There's a city representative from each city. There's a university vice president from each university. And there's a county representative from Idaho, and then one that's at large on the Washington side that really is the county, the port, that kind of thing. And they represent the region's vision. Well, they had a strong vision. They knew what they wanted out of the airport. So I've never had to ask the airport board, what do you want?
Yeah, that's awesome.
My job's to figure out how to navigate and how to execute what they want. But there's never been a question about what was wanted out of that airport. And they support it. And so at first, I think we started out of the master plan, and I'd finished the master plan. Rob Parrish at the time had taken the airport to that far. And he was here, I think, 10 years and worked the airport through a lot of the changes to try to just get it ready. And then one of the first things that we had to do was try to get everything out of our way. So if you needed snow removal equipment, for example, if we needed a fire station, we needed certain things that had to get put into place because you're going to build this giant runway. Well, all your money, all your energy, everything is going to go to the runway. And if you didn't have the snow removal equipment in place before the runway gets built, you're going to look like an idiot when you open up the runway. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it was really trying to think as forward as far as possible to what pieces needed to be in place when this thing opens. So we started an environmental process that took 2 years and cost $3.2 million. Wow. But we didn't know that we had an impact. That's why it's not an environmental impact statement. But it was more complex. From the environmental side, it was more complex as an environmental assessment than most EISs are. Mm-hmm. We had to deal with a creek. We had to deal with a lot of land. We had to deal with relocating a transmission line that fed both cities, so with a vista, a floodplain, 8 million cubic yards of earth had to move. Wow! And so we're literally having discussions about the Palouse earthworm. Is it endangered? Is it not? We didn't find it, by the way.
Didn't find one. That's good.
No, we didn't. It isn't endangered. We didn't find that out. But you're looking at all these things in an environmental, and then the other problem we had was terminal. So we cleared a terminal building with the environmental with the runway. But if you can't land the airplane, you don't need the building.
Right.
So the priority became pretty apparent really fast. And so we need to fix the runway, and then we'll look at this issue about operating out of a closet that the terminal is right now compared to what we're doing. And at the time, we're at 32 to 33,000 enplanements, people getting on an aircraft.
Okay.
So we do 2 years of environmental. When we get through the environmental, we start into construction. We're doing design and land acquisition at the same time. And when you buy land with federal money, it's a very different approach. If I was to come to you and we're going to talk about buying your house, right? We would come to an agreement, we'd make a deal, and we'd be done.
Yeah.
But that's my money and your money. When you're using the federal government's money, it's a very, very different deal. I don't talk to you until I show up to your door with a piece of paper saying, here's my offer for your house. And my offer is probably not going to be what you think your house is worth. Mm. So that's how you get to start. Well, that is not a comfortable place for a lot of people, but again, it's not my money, it's the public's money. And the worst thing that I could do is come up to you and say, hey, let's work out a price, and then turn around and use somebody else's money to buy it.
Yeah.
Because that's fraud, and I'm not interested in going to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And people don't understand that. How come we couldn't just work it out like we would, like we would with, a house? Well, that's because it's your money and my money, and we're using the federal government's money, so we're going to do it A, B, C, D, E.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how it goes. Is you do a full appraiser, you make an appraisal, and then you make an offer. And then you get to start doing the back and forth. But it's an arm's length transaction. It tends to be very adversarial. We did not go to court, luckily. And one of the things that we had to really work on with land was, Washington State University was very difficult. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't so much about the land, it was about the research. You've got programs that are, say it's a 15-year research program, it's in year 7.
Wow.
Well, vibration, noise, dust, what impacts these things, and it's infectious disease research for animals.
Or moving it to a new location.
Or moving it, and how do you do it? And then how do you explain that to the federal government?
Yeah.
Because the FAA, that's a building, that's property, it's worth X, and that's that. And we had to get the FAA around to, okay, well, how do we deal with this and get this moved, yet move and continue construction? And we were able to get the university. One of the things that we did with the value of the university is they all look like, if you go to the west end of the airport, it looks like a bunch of just metal buildings. Well, that's not the reality of what they are. They've got specialized features. In a lot of those buildings, there's like a coating on the floor, but it's a bio-level 3 hazmat kind of a coating. Well, what's the value of that? And then it's got positive air systems and things like, what's the value of those? So we had a third party come in that wasn't us and wasn't WSU and break down all these buildings and put a value to all the specialized improvements. And so we worked through all of that, and then we're trying to figure out, so we finally come to a price, and here's what we can do. This is the best we can do. Here's an offer. The university takes the offer. Of course, now the university's got it. We had to work through a year of transition time because of the research. How do you move this stuff?
Yeah.
So they took the money, they turned it into new facilities, and then we're starting to move, and we're watching vibration, we're watching noise, and we're trying to continue moving construction forward to stay on a timeline. And we were able to figure out how to work that out, but extremely complex. Our relationship with the FAA and the consultant is very simple. It's difficult. If you're a closed entity, what we did is almost impossible. But we're not that way because the board's not that way. The cities aren't that way. So when we'd run into a problem, and we ran into lots of them, with the FAA, you think the FAA is the regulatory body and all these things, and we have a great program manager with the FAA who was engaged and has stayed engaged. And the same thing with the consultant, Mead and Hunt. We call them consultants because they do engineering and they do planning, but I can find anybody that can do engineering. I can find a lot of engineers. I can't find a whole bunch of them that know how to do engineering the way the FAA needs it done.
Yeah, so and they know the ins and outs of.
Therein comes the consultant part, because the FAA is completely different than Department of Transportation. Anything else that you would deal with, FAA is a very specialized kind of a thing, and TSA is the same way. And so we'd run into a problem, and how we dealt with the problem is we'd take the whole thing, we'd dump it out on the table, and everybody get to look at it at the same time. Within about 2 to 3 minutes, it became very apparent what we were going to do. I might have hated the solution. The FAA might have hated the solution. The consultant might have hated the solution. But it became really apparent when you do that what the step that moves forward is going to be.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, you're talking about little tiny pieces, and you're moving a whole program forward. And you have to remember what you're doing, because it's easy to get caught up in the minutia of stuff, and it's easy to get caught up into the adversarial pieces of, well, I want to do this or I want to do that, or we're working with this, or the regulatory body of X, Y, Z doesn't like, whether they're Army Corps of Engineers or ecology or Fish and Wildlife or whoever we're dealing with at the time, or a landowner or whatever the case may be. You have to remember it's a piece of a bigger puzzle, and it's momentary. And so there's a lot of ups and a lot of downs and a lot of things that go with that. But if you treat the process the same way with every single decision point, and you get everybody's perspective immediately, the project never went backwards and it never stopped. And to be able to say that with that magnitude of a project is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But it was because nobody cared about, their egos weren't in the room. And it's the same way with the board. When we needed support, we got support. The board, very, very rarely do we have a 6-2 decision in there. We set out all the information. We say, here it is. And we've given them some very difficult things to have to consider. We had a project budget. You think you know what a project's going to cost. You never know.
Yeah.
And I don't care how good your consultant is, and especially public projects. People see the federal wheelbarrow coming. And that's how it's seen, too. And then when you run into things like piping, because we have massive drainage out there. There's 6-foot by 8-foot box culverts over a quarter mile long, 60 feet in the ground. And it's picking up Airport Creek, and it's shunting it out. We built the largest mitigation site in eastern Washington.
Wow.
So we had to mitigate all of this, all the water, all of the wetlands, all the creek. Clomar, a brand new map, which is for FEMA floodplain, because everything drains into it. And back in 1930, when they were siting an airport, they found a flat spot in the Palouse. It just happened to be in the bottom of the creek bed.
Yeah, flat spot in the Palouse. That seems like an oxymoron.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
does.
well, they found one, and it's but it's underneath everything else, and that doesn't work for airplanes. Moscow Mountain in the 1930s was a long ways away. It was 737 today. It's right now. It's right there. But financing, finding all the financial partners and working with, having a true public-private financial partnership. Ed and Beatrice Schweitzer wrote $1 million check. And then Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories company wrote another $1 million check. So people talk about public-private. And usually that's a handshake, and we're kind of involved. They were fully engaged. But it's important to their business and important to their capability to operate here.
Yeah.
And so the cities were in for $2.5 million each. The universities were in. The state aeronautics institutions were in. Both counties, a port for Whitman County, but all of the partnerships that went into that. And then we're trying to figure out, the first thing we had was a 5% match. After 9/11, they dropped it. Used to be 10. Well, Senator Crapo for Idaho, when they made the change from 10 to 5, they said, okay, well, when it goes back to 10, we really need to talk about western states where the federal government owns most of the state, because the federal government does not pay taxes to itself.
Yeah.
So how is that equitable? And what they did was they carved out the western states, and they changed the match based on how much federal land was in the state. So fast forward to 2012, we finally get a reauthorization in Congress to reauthorize the Airport Airways Trust Fund, which funds all of this. And it's the only trust fund in Congress that Congress hasn't raided yet. But all the monies for aviation end up in this trust fund, and that's what pays it. And so the match changes. Goes back to 10 except for western states, and the only two western states that doesn't go back to 10 is Washington and Montana. Airport's located in Washington, has ownership in Washington and Idaho. Idaho's match is 6.25, Washington is 10. So we are disenfranchising one partner entirely.
Wow.
So we start with the FAA, and we're like, okay, well, we'd like to fix this, and can we do it through what is known as the handbook? And it's the administrative rules that the FAA promulgates legislation through, and says this is how we're going to do it. And they looked at that, and they went, nope. You're going to have to go congressional, but if you go congressional, you need to make sure that you're paying attention to, we'll call it unintended consequences of asking for congressional assistance. People think going to ask at Congress for stuff is, easy. And the reality is when you're asking Congress for something, you're handing them a box of parts. And you don't know what they're going to build you. It could be a bicycle. It could be a Ferrari. You might not need either one. So you have to be very circumspect with what you're doing because you can't earmark. You can't say, do this for Moscow-Pullman.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a grouping. And right away we get a call from FAA headquarters. We start pushing on this because we're starting with 2 states. And they're 2 states that are they're diametrically opposed. The 2 senators on the one side are on one side of the aisle, and 2 senators on the other side are on the other side of the aisle. But when they're working for constituencies, it's not about D's and R's. It's not about lefts and rights. It's not about any of that. It's your constituent. And so we started with Senator Crapo's office because he put the match together. Okay, well, what is it? How do we use it? Can we expand it? Can we fix a border situation where we've got 2 sponsors? Now, there's not a lot of 2-sponsor across borders kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Are
It's
there
rare.
any other airports that are maybe a handful that have ownership on from 2 states?
Yeah, there's a few throughout the country. There's none that I can think of that are in the western states that are covered by this law, except for us. But there are airports that are within a distance of a border, 15 miles of a border, 20 miles of a border being state that were different. So, West Yellowstone being one of them, Walla Walla, Washington being one of them. There's one of them, I think it was Utah, and there was us. And so
Lewiston would be, right?
Lewiston would be, but the ownership isn't. They're already on the right side of the border.
Okay.
And now if the airport was in Clarkston,
Then you would be dealing.
then you'd be in a different situation. But yeah, Lewiston would be. So then you're looking at that kind of thing. And so what they did was they said, okay, airports within X amount miles of a border, I think it was 15 miles of a border, because we gave them about 4 different options, I guess, to try to craft and keep it where it was tight. We're trying to get one apple out of the cart. We're not trying to tip the whole cart over. Because, one of the things you could start thinking about with borders and things like that is the port of New Jersey and New York. Well, now you're talking big money. You're not talking, you're not talking a little bit of money. You're talking a lot of bit of money. And we didn't want to upset the whole apple cart. So, help us figure out how to get our situation figured out within this constraint. And so it started with Senator Crapo's office, and it worked with Senator Cantwell's office, and trying to get things worked out with the legislation. Ultimately, it was put into legislation because Senator Murray was on appropriations. So Senator Murray in Washington ended up putting this through. Well, it took us 2 years.
Wow.
And dragging 2 mayors to D.C. a couple of times. We did that. We did with that. Instrumentation on the new runway. That was a struggle because the FAA is trying to move into next gen. Well, they've been trying to move into next gen for a long time. And the old runway had microwave landing system, transponder landing system. We'd seen them. They'd come. They'd failed. And the last thing that we wanted to do was we're going to go sink $100 million of federal money into this project, and we're going to go back and tell our community that, well, we've got something new for you. And they've already seen the new, and the new didn't do well. So just make us like everybody else, and when you come get their stuff, you can come get this one, because then it's done. And it's just like everybody else. So we fought for an instrument landing system for over a year and finally got that. So now it's standard. It's like every other airport. It has an instrumentation capability just the same as all of our neighbors and other airports that are in the Northwest.
So no more of the fog landing issues, or at least not to the same extent.
Not to the same extent. So for example, on the fog, did we get rid of the fog issues? No. Did we make it better? Significantly.
Okay.
So last year we had 4 flight schedule last year, so 4 flights a day, and for the winter we canceled 53 or 54 for visibility. There's cancellations for other reasons, and there were more than that. This year on a 5 flight schedule, we've canceled 11 for visibility.
Wow.
Now there's been other things we have issues. Seattle is a very tough issue because Seattle just has one storm come through and they have to slow everything down. Everything gets spread out. they start dropping flights. And if they know a system's coming, they will pre-cancel your flights. And then they did that to us this winter. But then you have mechanicals. We've had crew rest issues where the pilots, they just time out. You just can't go anymore because everything, especially the winter, when you start adding de-icing and you have visibility, you have to start adding space and time to when planes can land and planes can take off. And Seattle's already under a crunch for capacity. That doesn't help anything. And it's easier to cut an hour flight from Pullman, Moscow, than it is to stop a plane that's halfway across the country coming from the East Coast.
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
we're just the easiest one to cut. And, it is what it is. But we're working through that. Our relationship with Alaska Airlines is outstanding. And they've been extremely good to us as a carrier. Working through everything. And one of the decisions the airport board made a long time ago was we could have pursued air service a decade ago. And the decision was not to, because we were going to, you're going to dance with the one that Bry is, the way that Mayor Johnson puts it. And he's right. Because we wanted to make sure that the carrier that we had was viable through all of this stuff, especially when the carrier's decision-making is what necessitated the change with the runway.
Yeah.
That airplane is the reason for the change. It's not we wanted to expand to fit other things. It's we didn't fit where we were already landing.
Right.
So that's kind of where we've come. What does it look like? You mentioned the terminal. What are the plans? Are there plans now for a new terminal now that the runway's in place, or what are the next steps going forward?
So the next steps going forward, this year we're building one half a taxiway. And so for people that understand taxiways and runways, taxiways are like interchanges off the interstate. Being on the interstate's fine, you got to get off. And you got to be able to get somewhere. Well, a taxiway is a parallel piece of pavement that goes next to the runway, that you get off the runway, you get on a taxiway, and then you get to a ramp and you get to park. But that taxiway is the connection between parking and taking off.
Okay.
And we're doing that over 2 years. That was painful to do it that way, and we paid a premium for doing it that way, but we won't shut down the runway again. Shutting the runway down for a month in September was not ideal. We didn't have a choice, but it was painful on a lot of people. And so how will you avoid that a second time when we stretch it out over 2 years? Well, you're going to pay money because the contractor has no idea what the price of anything in 2 years is going to be.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll build half the taxiway this year, half of it next year. Terminal, we're starting a concept and budget report this year, so we're starting design.
Okay.
And the concept and budget report really goes into the first thing we're going to start with is a forecast. Anytime we've ever put it together, a forecast, we've busted it within, about 12 months. So we'll say we think we're going to do this. I remember we were talking about 32,000-ish people were getting on a plane when I got here. Okay, last year we went over 70.
Wow.
Okay.
So 70,000 people.
Yeah.
And that'll probably only get more now that there's the new runway.
Yeah. The confidence in the system and things like that, that'll just continue to go, barring, COVID-19 and
Right.
some of the impacts that are happening with nationally with the impacts of that particular event. And we'll get through the event with COVID-19 and we'll see, probably things come back to normal. But for right now, just nobody, especially in the aviation industry, travel industry, nobody knows what's going on.
Yeah.
Other than people aren't traveling.
Right.
But yeah, we'll start concept and budget report. We'll start with a forecast, and that'll tell us how big of a building and what's eligible from the FAA standpoint. The FAA, they max out at discretionary money. They can give you $20 million for a terminal if you're a small airport, which we are. But past that, it's your problem. They don't care what color it is. They don't care what artwork's in it. That's a community issue.
Yeah.
So I've been asked about, the terminal will be a lot easier to build. And I'm like, I don't think so.
A lot more decisions have to be made. Huh?
Oh, yeah, because you start with with a runway, the FAA tells you how thick it's going to be, what color it's going to be, how it's going to get painted, all of, the terminal, they don't say any of that. So that's all a community decision. And the community, we're going to probably fund it the way that we funded the terminal. Or we funded a runway. We didn't bond anything with the runway.
Wow,
all
that's
partners
awesome.
come with a match. And the terminal is probably going to be a very similar kind of thing. Is what can we generate match-wise, because bond fatigue in most cities, there's a lot of things that have been bonded, and it's, can we do this without going through a bonding process? And can we figure out how to deal with the partners that are there and say, okay, well, this is what's important, and if we have money for it, we'll do it. If we don't have money for it, we won't. Anything we build will be bigger and better than we have today.
Yeah.
Because we've been limping through that, and we built a little baggage claim building, just try to separate the flows, because that building was built for 19-seat aircraft. It was not built for 76-seat aircraft. It was definitely not built for charters. And we send 737s through there all the time. With football teams, and so that a lot of that activity is coming back because we weren't built for it before, and now we are. And so you'll start seeing some changes in some of the charter activity, but it keeps people where, to and from where they're going to go. Those planes are coming here because of the athletic events and this and that. But any time that planes, from an air service standpoint. Anytime we're talking about air service, we're talking directly about support to the local community economically. Somebody drives into your community, if they have the choice to go do a whole bunch of things. They could stay in your community, they go to the next community and do whatever. When they fly into a community, they have to have a place to stay. They typically will get a rental car or transportation of some kind. They're going to eat at restaurants.
Interesting.
So it's a very different experience, because you think about yourself when you drive somewhere,
right?
What your thought process is versus when you fly somewhere, what your thought process is, and how much are you supporting the community that you're in versus, depending on your transportation options.
Just driving through. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. Huh.
So it's a very big difference. And so when we're talking air service development, that's direct injection of economic impact to the region.
Right.
And it's not partial, it's 100% direct injection.
Well, like you said, when we're in a place where we don't have a major interstate, we don't have the port, we don't have some of those things, the air service is how people are coming and going. I mean, that's
right.
That's how they're getting here.
That's how they're getting here, and it's how we're getting out. So that's what we do. And so a lot of people don't look at it that way. We certainly do. Air service development, we received a small community air service development grant from USDOT, which is huge. They're very hard to get. I've been lucky enough, this is the second one I've got.
Wow.
But I think with this one, 53 communities applied and 15 got a grant, or 18 got a grant. So they're hard. It's extremely hard to get. But we had a lot of support from the local community. And so there's funds from different places to match this grant. We haven't got the grant from USDOT yet, so we're working through. It's a long, slow process. But air service itself is a long, slow process. It doesn't. You don't just come in and say, "Ta-da! We're going to serve the region." I mean, that's just not how it works. We've been talking to United for 4 years.
Wow.
And it's not, the airport. I kind of initiate the contact. We open the door, but the big push behind that is the chambers.
Yeah.
Chambers of commerce they are a representative of the business community. When the airline looks at the airport, we're the landlord. That's what the airline's looking at. They're not looking at the airport. We represent the airport and a service opportunity, that kind of thing. But when their airline's talking to a chamber of commerce, in our case, 2 chambers of commerce, that's a very different discussion, because they're listening. This is the business community that's talking to them, because the airline's looking for a fit.
They're they need full seats.
Yeah.
Full
They're
planes.
looking for somewhere that's going to fill those planes, because you're not competing. We always talk about the competition, and people think it's this, it's a narrow thing, and it's not. You're competing with every place that airline flies, and everywhere they put an aircraft, because they've got X amount of aircraft, and they're looking to you as a small community to help assume risk. It's easy to drop service into Spokane or Boise. It's a known market. The airline knows what they're going to get. You get into a smaller market like us, there's a lot of unknown. They don't know what they're going to get. So it's like, okay, you want service to whatever, Denver, Boise, Portland, Vegas, LA, pick a place. you're a small community. How do you prove that up? And what the airline will ask for is a revenue guarantee, which is what that grant helps us do. Is it puts up basically an insurance policy, and then they'll ask for marketing funds. Are you going to help launch this service and make it successful? Because if it's successful, it's good for the airline, and if it's good for the airline, it's good for the community.
Right.
Because it means people are using it. If the airline pulls it, it's because people didn't use it.
Right.
And so that's the challenge with it, is the marketing and the things that got to go in there. But as a small community, you're an unproven market. And what the airline's looking at is how serious are you about wanting this service, because you're asking for an asset that we have in very short supply, and we could put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
We're going to put it where it makes us money.
Is United, is that who you're having the most traction with so far?
Yeah, so it's United or a United affiliate carrier, so it could be SkyWest, it could be Contour, but United will make ultimately the decision's United, and our discussions with them here 2 weeks ago were very good, very positive. The earliest we could ever see service, and I'm pretty sure that's pretty much gone by now, would be fall. But just what's going on with the industry at this
The
point.
travel
Everybody's,
halts.
I'm sure, shut down.
So likely in 2021, definitely in 2022. The grant goes for 3 years.
Okay.
So we have to initiate service within 3 years, which is fine, because again, it's not a rush. It's we want to launch that service when it's most opportune for them to fill seats and people to be able to utilize the service to the most extent possible.
And where would that likely go?
They go to Denver.
Denver?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Denver gives us 32 additional one-stop connections that Alaska out of Seattle, which Seattle just doesn't have.
Wow.
32 doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start thinking 450 commercial service airports, 32 is a lot of.
Yeah.
That's a
Big
lot
percent.
of airports. It's a huge percentage. And so if you can go east and west, well, then we can start talking about some other things. We've been talking to Alaska about a Boise, and that'll take a revenue guarantee, but we're working through, what's the possibility about getting service at least through the school year. In the summertime, we can probably drive to Boise. But in the wintertime, when legislature's going on, when you need the connectivity, and the University of Idaho is the largest state institution in northern Idaho, they need the connectivity. And so we're still trying to solve that. We've been working on solving that. But Alaska didn't shut the door. And they said, well, we could entertain certain things. And so we're going to work through that. We talked with Allegiant. We talked with Delta. We talked with SkyWest. We talked with Alaska. Alaska's very happy with the service that it's been. Yeah, and one of the things Alaska brought up was the issues in Seattle. Seattle's going to become what is known as slot restricted. And what that is how to explain a slot. A slot is a timeshare at a gate.
Okay.
Or a landing and takeoff. And a lot of the eastern airports, so you go to LaGuardia, you go to Boston, you go to DC, they are slot restricted airports. And so it's demand management. They're managing the demand, and the FAA issues what is basically a timeshare of gate time and landing and takeoff time to these airlines and say, this is the schedule you're going to run. Here's how much time you have. This is what you're going to do. And so they manage the demand that way. And those slots can be bought, they can be sold, they can be traded. And so they have a value, but you have to fly them to use them. And so in the news recently, going back to COVID-19, how big of an impact, the FAA has lifted the slot restrictions on East Coast airports because they've had airlines trying to keep the slot, because if you don't use it, you lose it.
And then they're flying mostly empty planes in just
Yeah.
to keep the slot.
They were launching a plane empty, flying around the pattern
man.
twice and landing, and the FAA goes, well, okay, it's probably stupid.
You're bleeding enough money. as
Yeah,
it is.
so they lifted the restrictions on the slots, but that's what's going to happen with Seattle. When that happens, Portland is not a when, or an if. Portland is a when, because what do you do with the flow-through traffic? The flow-through traffic will start hitting Portland, so you will likely see a Portland flight out of here, probably within the next 2 years, when that designation gets put on SeaTac. SeaTac's going to grow to the point where it can grow, and that's going to be it.
Right.
And it'll hit capacity, and then once demand management gets put in place, then okay, what do we do with the flow-through traffic to try to manage that? And Alaska has a plan for doing that, and and we'll see what happens.
So within a few years, we could be talking Denver, Boise, Portland, Seattle have a number.
Yep.
A lot more options.
You
than
could
we
be
have
talking
now.
a lot more options.
Wow.
But we're into the point now where we can at least go talk to the airline, and it's not, please come service our airport so we can handcuff your operation because we don't meet standards.
Yeah.
Which is a very different discussion. When our first discussion with United was kind of interesting. We went in there, and it was me by myself. It was before the chambers got involved, and I'm trying to feel out the waters with it. And we go in there, and myself and our service consultant is done through Mead & Hunt. It was kind of unique. Mead & Hunt's the only architectural engineering firm in aviation that has its own air service development arm. And so Trina and I are talking with him, and the gentleman for United, he just sits back and he smiles. He says, "You made my day." And I was like, "How's that?" And he says, "We do this all the time with communities all over the country." He says, "And I've never seen a market opportunity that we've never seen before." He says, "I've just seen a market opportunity that we have literally never seen before because we never put it out. We couldn't. How do you sell Pullman and Moscow with a deficient runway?" So we were never in a position to talk about two universities and a growing tech sector and all these other neat things that happen here.
Right.
You couldn't tell anybody about that because, runway taxi
Didn't have the infrastructure.
You don't have the
Yeah.
infrastructure. So you're limited by being able to do that. And when now the limitations are gone. So we can compete with communities that are our size or bigger, but we have an inordinate amount of people that travel by air. And so our market, the propensity of our market to travel versus other markets that may be a similar size, but their demographics aren't the same. The universities, so there's just a lot of really unique things about Pullman and Moscow that make it attractive for an air carrier because of how we do things and where people are from, how many international students.
Right.
We have a significant population that will travel.
Yeah.
And it's just trying to figure out, how to keep those here rather than sending them on a 2-lane road. Because we only keep 36% of our market, the market that flies out here.
Yeah.
The majority of them go to Spokane.
some
We've still
Lewiston.
got 7% that go to Seattle.
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
So I think the breakup is 50% Spokane, 7% Lewiston, 7% Seattle. But there are people that will drive to Seattle versus flying out of the region, anywhere on the eastern side. They'll drive to Seattle to fly.
Wow. Well, we should probably wrap this up time-wise, but that's super interesting.
That was fascinating.
Thank you so much for all your work, and it's exciting to see what's going to continue to happen with the airport, and it is such a huge part of our community, so really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're excited to continue to work on it. It's a great place to work. I could take a job doing somebody else's airport, but nobody hires people like me because they don't have problems. The nice thing about here is the community, the region, they own it. And they own the issues that go with it, and they support it. They're huge supporters of the quality of life that's in the region, and that comes from the mayors and the city councils and the leadership of the universities and the leadership in our counties. But it's just an amazing place to be able to work because they're asking you to do something that's very, very hard, but they're not just pushing you out there and not supporting what they want. And that makes a huge difference on being able to be successful and doing the things that support the quality of life in the region.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Tony.
You bet. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next week.